You've got it tuned into the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this week I got Rob Yang in the house. He's a nutritionist and educator, primarily with a whole bunch of PGA golfers, but he does dabble into the general population as well. He's a presenter for the Perform Better Training Summits. That's happening in Providence, Rhode Island, Chicago, Illinois, and Long Beach, California this summer, June, July, and August, not respectively. But check out performbetter.com for more information about it. And while you're online, go to nsca.com for all about the national conference, July 16th to the 19th in Kansas City, Missouri. Check out my website, rockysnyder.com. We've got continuing education workshops in person and online. There's podcast archives, some amazing guests, and a whole bunch more. Also, check out Satanta College. If you want a Master's of Science, just enter RS10 for 10% off tuition today. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Click that darn subscribe button if you haven't done it yet, and enjoy the show. Rob, thanks for coming on, man. We connected, of course, through Perform Better a few years back. I've listened to many of your lectures and presentations, and it's going to be a joy to just have this sit-down chat with you because, yeah, I've said this before in the episodes. This is a selfish pursuit on my part doing this podcast because I get to have a person, an expert, and I can pepper them with as many questions that I'm curious about and want to know. And this episode is going to be up there on the list of how I gain knowledge because your background, nutrition, functional medicine, all of that. I want to soak it all in. So first of all, welcome to the Zelos podcast, Rob.
Thanks for having me, Rocky. It's always good to see you.
Always good to see you. You know where we need to see each other is out on the water.
That's right.
We got to connect. Our sons surf circles around us, but that's okay.
Yep.
We'll just stay in the center. Let them grab a few, and then we'll take the choice select set waves as they're groveling for the insiders. How about that? Next time we're together for sure. I know Santa Cruz water is a little bit cold for your Southern California blood, but we've got plenty of rubber up here we can wrap you in, so don't you fret. How about this? How about we kick off with letting the listening audience know who Rob Yang is and how you got to be where you are right now?
Yeah, so my path of where I'm at now, I have a different practice where sometimes I'm the nutritionist and sometimes I'm the strength coach. Sometimes I'm both. And so that part of my practice has really grown in terms of nutrition side of things, of doing blood work and stool sampling and hormonal testing to figure out how I can help this particular person. And some people, they assume I work with athletes only. I work with, the general population where it might be a 13-year-old with, some skin conditions to the elite athlete. So I enjoy working with all types of people. So I'm not really stuck with, I just work with golfers or I just work with athletes, that kind of thing. And so, just like you said earlier, you had this itch about nutrition. You wanted to learn about things. It was always scratching my own itch. So I played, basically major sports in high school, American football, track and field. And I just got into the weightlifting part of it, power lifted, Olympic lifted, bodybuilding. And then, so it was just constantly itch for that side of things of performance and looking at, nutrition journals. And I do study more than I did in college, obviously. I'm reading journals. I just was finishing a journal this morning, article. And so obviously if you love what you do, then you're going to study it quite a bit. So anyways, I was always scratching my own itch. And eventually, obviously, I was doing nutrition and strength conditioning at the same time, and then gradually gone up. And most people know me as a nutritionist because I obviously speak on the Perform Better tour, and most of my lectures all around, the world are normally with nutrition. So that's where, and that's probably where my practice will go more of anything in the future. At this state, though, that's pretty much where I'm at. I would probably say 80% of my consults are via Zoom. Ever since, COVID 2020, I work with people worldwide, consulting with them on their nutrition and whatever problems they have. Normally, there's always some kind of issue, right? whether it's digestive or hormonal, not recovering very well. So those are the things that I'm trying to find the hidden icebergs and why they're not recovering or why they're not healing their gut or balancing out their hormones.
Got it. So you say you're leaning toward that direction because just flowing with the demand of your clientele, or is it that strength conditioning is great, but you're more intrigued by the ever-changing world of nutrition and the science backing?
Uh, I'm intrigued to both.
Yeah,
I just signed another lease for my studio, and part of me is like, oh, from a business end, well, that's overhead every month, every year. So do I really need to do that? But I still enjoy working with people in that capacity. So I'm not ready to let that go. Obviously, over time, you invest in pieces of equipment and those kinds of things. And so
yeah.
I guess you can say I'm a hoarder when it comes to um, fitness equipment, that kind of thing. You find a piece, you're like, okay, I'm not ever letting this go, or I've got legal plates and those kinds of things. So, but well, time will tell. Over time, I might travel a little bit more next couple of years, but we'll see what happens with the strength and conditioning part of things.
Where did you go to school?
I went to just below you guys, University of California, Santa Barbara.
Hey, all right,
Yeah.
not bad.
But the thing is, I
So,
didn't start surfing till I got married. So I boogied, you know, boogie board, bodyboard, from, I don't know, sixth grade all the way through. I boogied up in Santa Barbara for a bit, but at that point, I was so invested in weightlifting and bodybuilding, powerlifting at that point. So I didn't really realize the type of wave that you have in Santa Barbara, obviously.
sure. Now there's some good waves there for sure.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I grew up myself body surfing on the coast of New Hampshire in the summertime. So, which is actually warm water when the Gulf Stream
Yeah.
gets strong at that time of year. But yeah, it wasn't until I got out to Santa Cruz that I really put a board between the water and my body. So I'm on the same level with you. But
Yeah.
uh, so from Santa Barbara, went back to Southern California, and
Mm.
then you started connecting with not only general population but athletes. These days, a lot of PGA players are some of your clients. Just give us kind of like not your resume, but uh, you've delved into NFL players,
Mhm.
other professional sports. But did you have any kind of desire to sign up to work with a team, like to be the team dietitian or strength conditioning coach or anything of that nature?
In terms of the team sort of nutritionist or those kinds of things, I did think about it at one point. From a business side of things, just thinking back and talking to colleagues, I was always people always recommend, don't do it. I've done it before, and it sounds prestigious of being the strength and conditioning coach for this university, but somewhat your hands are tied to a certain degree, and so I
Oh,
didn't really want to
yeah.
have to deal with that. Um, I guess it's always been a goal. I mean, obviously, I just forgot now, but I've been the team nutritionist for the USGA junior national team. So believe it or not, in terms of having an official funded, national junior team, US has never had one. I mean, I've
Wow.
lectured all over the world. I've lectured in Spain, in Colombia. I mean, they all have a government funded, or funded for whatever reason national junior team officially, and they name 18 kids or whatever that is. The US really didn't have one until now, and so it's really exciting, really cool. And so anyways, I've been involved in that. So we've got I think, well, now we've got, I think, 20 plus juniors on the national team. So we've had 3 camps already. So in that capacity, obviously we have a team of a physio and a strength and conditioning specialist, and then I'm the nutritionist. So just trying to get these kids up to speed in terms of nutrition and those kinds of things. So that part of it I'm involved in, as sort of like with the team at this point. Um, and but it's interesting. It always seems as if I get waves of athletes. So sometimes I get, for a couple months, some PGA guys, and then other times I'll get some like NFL quarterbacks because, Tom House, he's basically, you know,
Tom's great.
yeah, I mean, major league pitcher back in the, 80s, 70s, 80s. And then, you know, I would almost guarantee at this point he's probably working with half the starting NFL quarterbacks at one time,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
usually. So normally if he got guys coming to town and they have questions on nutrition or they've got some recovery issues, he's like, hey, I want you to go see Rob. So sometimes I get, a load of those guys, and then sometimes I get other athletes. So it's interesting how it comes in sort of waves with their working with different athletes. But funny part of that was that when I first came out of school and I started the strength conditioning, CSCS, and that whole thing, I was like the guy that, I only want to work with athletes. That was my sort of thought process. But of course, in my first, 3 to 5 years, I didn't get any athletes, zero, basically general.
Hmm.
And that part of my career was actually working on corrective exercise. So at that point, I don't know, probably in 2000 and I would eight, maybe a little later. I taught for the Czech Institute probably for, I don't know, probably about 6 or 7 years.
Nice.
So that part of it, I was basically immersed in corrective exercise, dealing with lumbar disc bulges, spinal stenosis, spondylolisthesis, cervical issues. So that part of it, I was kind of really hammering that end. Um, Not that I got burnt out, but if I have someone at this point that has major issues, I'll help manage that, but I'll probably refer them out at this point for deep, corrective, it's more of basic rehabilitative work.
Sure. So with the young players, USGA, uh, I can imagine I won't say it's elementary school information, but it's the building blocks, the fundamentals that you're trying to encourage there, right? So for the listening demographics of this podcast are typically uh, men between 24 to say 40 years old. And so I want to kind of talk about their nutritional needs, but also many of them are training young athletes. So from that perspective, what are the basics that you want to get across? Like that at the end of the day, you feel successful when these young athletes understand fill in the blanks.
Right. So, I mean, I think probably one of the reasons why I got the positions was because I wrote the book Hole in One Nutrition. Um, Before this, I mean, it took me, I don't know, 3 or 4 years to write it, but there was really no nutrition source for golfers in particular. And since 2004, I've been on the advisory board for the Timeless Performance Institute. So obviously, I just had so much exposure to the junior player, weekend warrior, all the way to the elite professional. So, um, golf is a different game, 4 to 5 hours. You technically are only hitting club for about 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes,
And
maybe.
I've seen the menu on the 19th hole, by the way. I'll just tell you that. It's
Exactly.
it's probably not aligned with your beliefs.
No. So that's why, I came up with my basically general food pyramid, really ultra simple. Bottom tier is hydration, the middle tier is going to be whole foods, and then the top tier would be supplements. So that would be just a general sort of food pyramid, nutrition pyramid that I think a lot of people can get some benefit from. Because obviously, if you don't have a foundation for hydration and water, then your food is not going to be effective. And obviously, if you don't have that foundation for whole food and blood sugar stability, then the supplements, they're not going to be that helpful. So I try to build upon that. So especially in the context of the junior national team, I just say, look, like if you get anything out of this next 3 days is just do one thing. So if that's you're not drinking water first thing in the morning, well, you should drink water first thing in the morning because there's many benefits to that. You wake up in a dehydrated state. I'll go into all these different reasons because even though they might be a 14-year-old to 18, 19-year-old, most kids, most people in general, if they understand why and how it affects your body, your physiology, then they'll go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to start doing some of that so that I can become a better player. Now, obviously, maturity level, if they're 14, they may not be willing to make those changes, even though they're on the course for 7 to 8 hours a day, practicing and grinding every day. So naturally, I just say, look, it's going to take some time. You're going to have to start to realize that some of these things are going to affect your game. Not eating for 18 holes for 4 hours. Yeah, you wonder why you made some dumb mistakes towards the end of the round. Well, maybe your blood sugar is dropping. Maybe you got pissed off after a shot and you were so livid, mad at yourself, and then you didn't calm down after that. Well, that could be based because on your nutrition, you weren't stabilizing your blood sugar.
Why do you believe there is a disconnect? If you do, I think there is a
Mhm.
disconnect between nutrition and performance historically. Like there's something. Whatever we put in our mouth, it just magically goes to where it needs to go, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
whatever we don't need, it's we have this disconnect between, like, no one is going to throw in sugar cubes into their gas tank and expect the engine to run on their
Yeah.
car properly, right? And and when we have a selection of fuel sources, we're going to choose it pretty much aligned with what the engine needs. But when it comes to the human engine and athletic performance, there's a complete disconnect.
I think it definitely is getting better. Obviously, just in this day and age, and you got social
Yeah.
media, and people are like, "Oh, well, plant-based or carnivore." I mean, you got actually too much information these days. Um, but I think part of the reason there's a little bit of a disconnect is because you're not going to get results right away. Or, with exercise, you feel the effects of it, right? Like, oh, I pushed myself, I grinded today, my legs are sore today. You get some kind of residual sort of effects from it. Whereas nutrition doesn't necessarily always lead to that. Like, obviously, if someone's nutrition is really bad, then, there's a certain percentage of people that, boom, you change something and they react right away. But that's not always the case. And I think for some people, it's difficult. So some people, they like their sugar, sugar in their coffee every morning, or they like certain things. So it's difficult to change those because ultimately what it comes down to is lifestyle changes that need to happen.
Yeah. So then
Yeah.
uh, comes the psychology or the therapy degree, right? It's like getting into the mental state of
Yeah.
things, which I'm sure you delve into to some degree, do you not, with your clients?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just on the sugar end of things, that people say, "Oh, I always need something sweet or something sugary, after my meals." And sometimes on the mental, emotional side of things, you can go back to, well, how were you as a kid? Like, did mom always have desserts? Oh my gosh, like she made the best cakes and cookies, and we only had dessert after dinner. And so partially some of it is just habit that have been developed over decades. So part of that is, well, okay, we got to start changing that habit around. It has nothing to do with the physical craving of that you have to have sugar. Um, so, sometimes we need to look back to maybe there's some mental emotional components involved that we need to probably deal with. And I tell people that too, is as I'm, if you're an initial person that I'm sitting with for an hour and they have, let's say, hormonal issues and they're tired all the time and, they just are surviving on coffee or Red Bulls, whatever that is, um, I will always ask about their stress level. So for many of these people that have, and they've worked with naturopaths, they've worked with other people, and they're not getting the results they want. Normally, there's usually a stress component involved. And when I say stress, it's not always mental, emotional stressors. So sometimes it could be their job. So maybe they're a construction worker, so they're physically actually exerting themselves quite a bit. Sometimes, obviously, there is the mental, emotional component. Maybe they had a death in the family, their dog died, their uncle that they're really close with died. So those are all stressors that need to be um, addressed or and taken accounted for because essentially you have a big cup, right? So this is basically your stress cup. So if it was filled underneath the brim and it wasn't going overflowing, then you're fine. You're not really symptomatic. But once you add stress, and it can come from mental, emotional, some of these junior players are practicing 6 to 7 hours a day. They're training 3 to 4 times a week because they want to hit the ball further. So you're basically pouring more stress in the cup. Eventually, as it overflows, that's when people get symptomatic. So it's a matter of not just stress management, but it's a matter of possibly stopping the amount of stress you're pouring into your cup, but then also possibly poking holes in the cup so that you can drain it right on a daily basis. So that's where I feel like nutrition can be so powerful for a lot of people, in that when you stabilize someone's blood sugar, that makes a person quite stress resilient. So the context of, we talk about anxiety or slight depressive effects, we're not much different than a 3-year-old. So if a 3-year-old hasn't had their lunch, hasn't had a snack, their blood sugar is dropping, they're going to be whiny, they're going to be cranky, their anxiety is going to go up, they're going to be moody. We're the same way. Obviously, things slow down as we get older, over the years, but ultimately, your body's looking for stability, especially in blood sugar. So when you have either a roller coaster or if it's dropping too much, that's when you get symptomology. So we can definitely impact that in a very, very powerful way with obviously what you're putting in your body, what in your mouth.
So we're talking frequency of eating, selection of food choices, and I imagine quantity as well. But how do you dial that in? This is great. Stabilizing blood sugar. What foods, and I have a pretty good idea what they are, but I want to confirm it with you. What foods will help to stabilize someone's blood sugar?
That's a great question. So that's what I dive into my book. And so something that I wanted people to remember very easily, in terms of, okay, how do I stabilize my blood sugar? And so I've always told people, look, your BFF, so your best friend forever, in terms of blood sugar stability, is PFF. So your BFF for blood sugar is PFF: protein, fat, and fiber. So all three of those things on its own, so protein on its own, fiber on its own, and fat on its own, will literally basically flatline your blood sugar. So
Hmm.
that's why I tell people, look, if you get a plate of food, your first priority is protein. And the Latin meaning of protein, proteos, means of primary importance. So that's why I try to get people to hey, look, get some protein on your plate first. Obviously, there's some fat in there, depending on if it's a ribeye steak versus a flank steak. And then your fiber sources, sort of on a top tier level, would obviously be veggies and fruits would be probably the best choices. Basically, more impactful, right, in terms of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, etc. And then if you need to, obviously, depending on the amount of exercise you're performing, then you add in things like rice and potatoes and starches and those kinds of things. But, you know, even in back in Arizona when we had the camp in February, I told the kids, look, if you're like listening to this and I'm talking about eating some bacon and eggs with some raspberries and then some fruit or something before you tee off, and you're like, screw Rob, I'm not gonna do that. I hate that, or I'm gonna have my Captain Crunch cereal in the morning. I just said, look, do me a favor, do that, but still have some bacon, okay, with that, or some sausages, because obviously I don't expect people to eat perfectly, but even if you combine some proteins and some fats with that cereal, is it the most optimal thing to do? No, but it's going to prevent this. So they might not be like the
Mhm.
valley of blood sugar, but they might be like that, which will be a much better situation rather than just eating, bagels, a cereal, and some orgeat before you go play. They're probably going to be hungry in 45 minutes an hour, and then they're going to probably crash in about 2 hours, wondering, why am I so tired, or why am I so moody? Why did I get so pissed off after that last shot?
So, what I'm gathering from you and your approach is that you try to find the middle ground. You don't go to one specific camp of belief, meaning uh, strictly plant-based, vegan
Mhm.
only, or we're going to go into the keto where it's all about meat and butter or whatever the case may
Right.
be. You're going to say, okay, if that's the approach that you want to take, great. Let's manage around that. Now navigate through that because honestly, we've been around for a while, and it seems like just like I jokingly say we've got this wheel that we spin every year, and whatever muscle group it lands on, that's the muscle that's going to be blamed for every orthopedic issue, whether it's the diaphragm, the glute medius, and so on. It
Right.
seems to be the same thing for nutritional approaches or AKA diet plans, where, I remember Covert Bailey back in the 90s with Fit or Fat, and he was all
Right.
about carbohydrates or get away from the fat. And then we had the eat right for your type, and there's just so many different approaches that I think that's why i I do a lot of outsourcing when it comes to nutrition and diets, because I feel like I don't know which way to turn. It seems like you've navigated that a hell of a lot better than I have. How did you come to be in the philosophy and the center in which you orbit right now in terms of all of the information that's circling around you?
A lot of trial and error. I mean, just when you say keto, I mean, um, I experimented with keto back in 93. Way back. I mean, and even before then, it was the
Hmm.
Banting diet and that sort of thing. And whenever I think about nutrition, basically what it is it's like fashion, right? It could just go in cycles,
Truly.
So I told my wife, "We're going to keep the bell bottoms because probably in, 5 or 10 years, they're going to come back in style." And that's literally what it's like, especially with
And
social media, because, you know, it's whether it's keto or whether it's, these different types of diets, they've all been there. Um, the PFF is sort of a principle, right? I don't tell people like, oh, everybody has to eat this way. I say for most people in general, that's sort of your base and foundation. And then you might have to shoot off of that. So a perfect example is one of the young juniors, he's 6'1", I think 125 pounds, like soaking wet. So he's really basically a beanpole. So for someone like that, I would tell them, look, because you obviously need to fuel your sport. Well, not so much fuel so sport, but for him, he wants to gain weight. So appetite is a problem for him. So a PFF principle for a young junior like that who's really looking to gain weight and increase his appetite, that might not be such a good plan for him. I might say, have your proteins. Obviously, you should have some fruit, but I don't want you to get a lot of fat in that diet. I want you to actually push some more starches with your protein with that particular player. So I tell people, look, it's a base and foundation. Like if you take, one guy who's 50 years old, he's an executive and he sits for 6 to 8 hours a day, but he plays golf 3 times a week. He's in Southern California, right? Weather is good all year round. For that particular guy who's maybe could lose a few pounds, I say go PFF most of your meals, or if he goes sees and he works out 3 times a week as well, then okay, have some rice or have some faster digesting carbs after you train in general. So that's why I say, look, it's based off of your activity level.
Hmm.
So, do I say for everybody? No. And there's certain times and purposes for maybe keto. There might be certain times and periods for something like carnivore. If someone tells me like, I tried the carnivore and all my symptoms went away, I go, okay, well, we're going to maybe do that, or maybe we're going to do some blood work to see what your immune system is reacting to in regards to food sensitivities. Okay, well, maybe we'll look at that. And then that way we can pinpoint, okay, these are the big ones you need to avoid. And I want you to follow this plan for this amount of time, and then we'll figure out what's going on.
I don't know. Right on. Just molding it into whatever the person needs, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where people get hung up. They go, "Oh, well, Rob only recommends, basically protein and vegetables." I go, well, that's your base foundation. Most people should be eating that like 70% probably the time. But then depending on if you want to run like they had the whatever St. Patty's Day marathon here in Encinitas. Well, if you're training for that and you're doing a lot of endurance sports, well, then your carb intake's probably going to go up so you can fuel your workout. So it depends on the person. So that's why obviously we're gearing the actual plan of action depending who's in front of me.
Talk to me a little bit, if you don't mind, about intermittent fasting. Give
Mhm.
me the ins and outs, if you don't mind. I've got so
Sure.
many people asking about it. So,
Yeah.
what's your take?
Yeah, I think intermittent fasting, it's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox. Some people think like it's a hammer and they look at everything as a nail.
Sure.
But again, it kind of comes down to who's in front of me. So I think it can be useful. So normally, for your listeners that are hearing this podcast, intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, technically they say in the literature, basically what it is you stop eating at 8 o'clock at night, and then you obviously sleep, and then you don't eat breakfast, and then you break your fast at 12. So basically you're fasting for 16 hours, and then you refeed window is 8 hours. And I've been playing around with that since 2010. So I would say JB, John Berardi, he's a well-known nutritionist in the industry, and he came out with the ebook long time ago. But even before that, he's like, Rob, I've been doing this. Like, you should check it out. If anybody knows about JB, he was like the 5 to 6 meal a day guy. So this was complete the opposite spectrum for him. And I think it can be used for some people, but the timing of it is what's really critical. And I would say the biggest mistake in the fitness industry is that people will try to do that and they train in the morning at 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock. So they
Mhm.
trainer or they go to a class and they train from 6 to 7 and they fast from 7 to 12. So
Uh,
that environment, essentially you've been sleeping for 8 hours. Hopefully you have. You wake up, you're actually in technically a catabolic state because your blood sugar's been dropping and progressively dropping through the night. And you wake up and you hammer yourself with exercise. So now you've actually put yourself in a catabolic state because now you got cortisol levels going up, you got adrenaline, noradrenaline going up, which is what you want to happen as you're training, right? Because you're actually trying to mobilize energy sources. You're basically being chased by the tiger when your workouts. Um,
yeah.
but what's critical is after you finish training at 7 o'clock for 6 to 7, you want to stop that catabolic process. So we know in strength and conditioning that in general, depending on the loads and the volume and sets and so forth, that around 45 minutes or so, you get that increase in testosterone, but you also get a concomitant rise in cortisol. So what you want to do is you want to drop the cortisol by eating after you train. But what's happening is you're constantly having this sort of elevation of cortisol for an additional 5 hours, and then you break your fast. And a lot of people, they either end up losing a lot of strength that way, they end up losing muscle mass, and it becomes a real problem. And then for females, we have to be very, very careful because I usually say to the husbands, look, you're like a Ram truck, 4x4. You can go over curbs, you can go over rocks and all kinds of other things. Your wife is a Ferrari, okay? She cannot do that, okay? Um, she's just as beautiful as you are, but you got to take care of her, right? Like you're not going to run over curbs and blocks and the rocks and those kinds of things in Ferrari. So in terms of obviously a female being different than the male, they have a monthly menstrual cycle. And so sometimes for females, if you go with intermittent fasting, it's probably maybe too severe of going without stabilizing their blood sugar. And there's actually some literature out there where they've actually shown that their DHEA levels actually drop quite a bit when they're intermittent fasting.
Hmm.
Basically, DHEA is basically that's the yin of the yang for stress balance. So DHEA and cortisol, they're kind of like brother and sister, so they work together. But oftentimes, with a lot of stress that people have, their cortisol levels are too high and their DHEA levels start to plummet. And DHEA is very, very important for um, repairing your tissues, brain tissue, your gut lining, your ligaments, all kinds of other things. And so that tends to drop down even further. So if you take a female who's an attorney who's super stressed out, got 3 kids and handling the finances and business and those kinds of things, for them to do intermittent fasting is probably not going to be ideal. They'll probably get worse over time because they're not going to be able to handle the stress load of things because eventually over time their DHA levels drop as their stress level keeps going up with the stress hormone cortisol. So yeah,
Hence the importance of doing blood panels
well,
and
that's where, yeah,
tests and
the
so on.
blood panels, so, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. So that's why in terms of blood work, and obviously you see it on, social media of all these companies that are coming out besides LabCorp of, okay, you can get your 100 plus, blood, biomarkers and figure out what's going on. Um, what I'm kind of seeing with that is sort of uh, being dysfunctional is that either they're using a logarithm, right? So they punch numbers in and then they're like, okay, spew, this is your supplements of what you take. And then there's general lifestyle recommendations. And what I try to get across to people is yes, we are looking at, okay, your vitamin D level is low, your folate level, but why is it low? So, um, for example, with folate and B12, well, if they've been a vegan for the last 2 years, 3 years, well, obviously they're not getting enough folate and B12, so that's going to be low. So then we have to have a conversation of, well, why are you going vegan or vegetarian? Well, if it's for religious reasons, that's a really tough one. If it's for purely health reasons, and they're like, well, I've heard that, eating meat is bad for you, and, therefore I went more vegan. Well, I said, look, your blood work is telling you that your folate, your B12 is low. So you're going into macrocytic anemia. Basically, it's just a type of anemia
Mhm.
that we need to address. That's one of the reasons why you're probably not getting oxygen to all parts of your body, your brain, all kinds of other things, because you don't have that folate and B12. And so the what I'm seeing is I'm getting, and this is just my experience, is that people are getting these blood works, they're ordering it because they can do that as a consumer, and they get it, and they're like, well, they're just taking, say, supplements A through D, and then they're not really lifestyle changes or
Got it.
specific nutritional changes of, hey, you need to do this, those kinds of things. Like I use supplements all the time, but we go with food first and water first, and we try to do that as much as we can. And then if there's any underlying gut issues or liver function issues, then we have to address those first.
So when it does come to supplements, because that's always a question that
Right.
comes up, what kind of supplements do you recommend? Well, I it all really depends upon the individual, but are there some basics that you would say, like obvious? I'm going to say obvious, but I may not be. A multivitamin is that something that everyone should be taking, considering the food choices that are out there on average? I mean, what do you recommend in regards to general supplementation?
With general supplementation, I mean, multivitamin, I would say to a certain degree, yes. Um, then it comes down to what's the quality of it is like, is it a one a day or is it a Centrum? Then you're looking at, well, they don't really have good types of, it's like a magnesium oxide or iron oxide, those kinds of things. So, in general, um, I would say yes, because of where our food supply is. Because even organic food now is not the same as non-organic food back in 1960
What do you
because of
mean?
so, for example, like, or there's a big push for organic, and that's a whole like massive topic in the sense that, there's really people that are like, well, that organic term is watered down now because you got Costco's and you got, Walmart's and those kinds of companies involved in that because it's a multi-billion-dollar business per year. Yes, that's
Hmm.
true, but I don't vomit on people with my clients. I just say, look, try to get some good quality food, organic food. That is important because we want to get less pesticides, glyphosate, those kinds of things. But even with the soil that we have now, it wasn't as nutrient dense as it was in the 60s, even though it was technically not organic as
Got
it is
it.
now. Because at that time, there are not nearly as many pesticides, chemicals, herbicides, fungicides as there are now. So, but that's a whole nother, topic in itself. Um, but you know, because of the soil depletion, yeah, I think that could be helpful. I would say just the two others that would actually take precedence over the multivitamin, actually, I would say, is vitamin D for sure. I know it's an older topic, but the reason why I bring it up is from a clinical perspective as a practitioner, when I'm doing blood work, I mean, 8, 9 out of 10 of people are still low. And depending on the blood work, it'll give you a reference range. So, for example, it might be 20 to like 100. You're going, well, what the hell? Like, that's a wide range. What's normal? And that's a problem within the medical community because technically, the way they come up with these reference ranges on blood work is they take 10,000 of the average Americans and then they do a bell curve and they figure out, okay, this is the range. But what do we know about the average American? 60% of our population, 70% is overweight, about 30, I would say actually 40 to 50% is obese. And we got epidemic of diabetes, prediabetes, cardiovascular disease, you name it. So I use functional ranges. So technically for vitamin D, the functional range would be more like 60 at the low end, 80. I would say 100 at the high end is more 60 to 100 is more of a functional range. So that's why I constantly see people in the 20s and the 30s. And so you have to get enough vitamin D. And I just had this conversation the other day with a person because she got busy with her work and then she's like, oh, Rob, I haven't really been taking the supplements. And you can see in her labs from the last, I don't know, 8 months ago, her folate levels plummeted, her B12 plummeted. B12 stayed okay, but vitamin D really dropped by half. And I said, what's happening? She said, well, I keep forgetting. And so I'm probably taking it 3 times a week, where I have her taking it twice a day, every day, supposed to be on the plan. And I said, look, I go, if you don't want to take it, that's fine. I need you to go, if you go to a tanning bed with UVB bulbs, then if you go 3 times a week for 20 minutes, you're good. You're probably getting a vitamin D via your skin. But most people aren't going to do that.
Right.
So that's why I say, look, you got to get this in every day because vitamin D is technically not a vitamin. That's a misnomer. It's a corticosteroid. So technically it's a hormone in your body. So that's why you have to have enough of it in your system.
Really?
Yeah.
Never knew that.
And it definitely has a hand in not only bone density. I mean, that's a huge one for especially our aging population on the female side of things too. But technically muscle, like it's not going to make a 20-year-old gain 5 pounds in, a couple months. That's not what it's going to do. But it has a hand in gut diversity. And then we're finding that has a huge context of the impact on your gut and keeping your gut healthy. But also from a brain perspective, your immune system. So there's lots of different reasons of why to get the right amount of vitamin D in your system. And even if you were in Costa Rica, but you lathered sunscreen on all the time because you don't want to get burnt, you're not going to make any vitamin D because anything over an SPF of about 8 blocks about 90% of the UVB rays. So the 7D cholesterol that is in your skin that converts and takes the vitamin D, from your skin into your liver and converts it, that doesn't happen because you're basically blocking it from the sunscreen.
Wow.
So there's
Never knew
lots of
that.
things to think about. So that's why I tell people, look, you don't have to take a supplement, but if you don't get sun exposure, like then you're kind of screwed. Like you have to get some sun exposure. Like obviously, like when we go surf on the surf trip, and obviously I'm of Asian descent, so I get pretty brown. And so, you can build up your tolerance to the sun quite quickly. You don't want to burn. But technically, if you get a suntan, you're basically getting at about a 2, 3, 4 SPF naturally by getting a sun.
Oh.
Yeah. The problem is, it's like the kids, right? They just go out there with nothing on and they fry in 6 hours, and you're going, well, like, duh, like you can't get, all that in 6 hours when your skin technically hasn't been exposed for, months because you've been in a wetsuit, surfing in Santa Cruz.
I hear it.
Anyways,
Well, I
that's
don't think
what you
vitamin
want to
D is a
know.
problem for me. I think I'm probably have the
And
surplus the
that's why
way
I
it
tell
is.
people, look, I go, at least when you get, and people should get blood work once a year. That should happen. And just they can add in vitamin D. Like most docs will. I mean, it took like, I don't know, 10 years for them to actually do that, to figure it out. But that would be the one to just kind of keep track of. And then the number 2 one is fish oils. the omega-3s, because essentially whatever you're eating, you're putting in your mouth, is basically making a very, very slow oil change at the cellular level. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if you go to like Mississippi, diabetes is rampant. I mean, it's like 80% of the population because most of their fats come from fried foods, right? So they're getting trans fatty acids. So their blood is almost like ketchupy in a sense. That's how viscous it is. The job of omega-3s is to make it, it's basically antiplatelet. So basically it thins out the blood, so to speak.
Wow.
But there's many different benefits to having the right amount of omega-3s. And we're talking about EPA and DHA. Those are the two omega-3s that your body needs. That's why they're deemed essential fatty acids, like we have essential amino acids. We as humans cannot make them, so therefore we have to eat it to get it. So that's why obviously you want to get your salmon, or you want to get your herring, mackerel, sardines, those kinds of things, because they have high amount of omega-3s. And I test this all the time. It's called omega-3 index. So I can get actual numbers of where people are at. And I go, well, it looks like you haven't been taking fish oils. I know. I stopped taking them whatever a month ago. And so their levels drop and plummet. But there's everything from helping with anxiety, slight depression. Definitely the big one is stress resiliency. So it helps to modulate cortisol levels for people that are highly stressed. It helps with body comp in terms of body fat loss and then maintaining lean body mass, as well as anxiety. So there's many benefits to them. And so it's just interesting because I see people post things like, oh, omega-3s are bad for you now. You shouldn't take them because they're highly, highly sensitive to heat and light and those kinds of things. I go, well, you're saying this one thing based off of one study that says it possibly could be negative to 1,000 studies. So for me, I'm going to take 1,000 studies that have been done over the last probably 5 decades.
Right on.
And that's kind of where our social media is, right? Like it's basically comes down to what can we sensationalize basically? What's the opposite of what's been said, right? And that's kind of where social media is, wherever you can get views on or clicks on. And that's unfortunate,
Well, speaking of social media,
process so people have understanding.
what about your social media? Because I have a feeling it's just not that way. Where can people follow you? Do you have an Instagram handle?
Yeah, so it's just Robert Yang, Yang. And then my website, if you want to look into what I do, robertyang.net. If you go to .com, it's a comedian. So just so you know, my second job is not a comedian, but it's robertyang.net. So, if you guys have, stuff you want to look at, go and visit that site. And then obviously my social, Robert Yang on it, IG.
And of course, you're going to be at Perform Better Summit. Which one are you speaking at? Are you going to be at Long Beach this year?
Yeah, I'm going to be at Long Beach.
All right. So that's going to be July 16th, 17th, roughly around there. Definitely a place to check out. Rob, I knew that you would not let me down. I learned so much in this amount of time, and I can't believe the time's flown by the way it has. I know we're just scratching the surface, so we're going to have to do this again, go deeper. I'd love to learn about hormone balancing, testosterone as we age, all this stuff that I didn't have enough time to ask you questions for because it was filled up with enough useful information. So I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Rocky.
It is a pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Zelos Podcast. I can't thank Rob enough for coming on. Can't wait to see him at the Perform Better Summits. Remember, it's Long Beach, California. That's going to be in July. Chicago kicks it off in June, and then it finishes in Providence, Rhode Island in August. Go to performbetter.com to find out more information. While you're at it, check out the National Conference for the NSCA, July 16th to the 19th in Kansas City, Missouri. Remember, you always got a good resource within my website, rockysnyder.com. Check it out, and check out my book, Return to Center. We'll see you next week.